1782, and apparently Duke Montrose was instrumental in repealing this, so we're not quite sure if that's exactly right, but he gets all the good press, and you'll hear him mentioned in the song. We'll start off with Order of Each Again. Second song that we're going to sing is Kitchin Yow, so 100 Farewells to the Bane. Duncan Ban's poetry in particular, when he was describing nature, is exceptional, and this poem is full of lots of description of nature. 100 Farewells to the Bane, so when he was leaving this area, this is what he was writing about, and
Amen.
feature written by Duncan Ban. It's called, it's just used to shouting, Cua Corrigiei, or the Lament for the Mystic Corrie. He is lamenting the fact that the current owners of the land, the current lairds, are not looking after it the way that he would have done when he was forester. He's saying they're cutting the tops off the trees, they're leaving the streams untended, they're filthy water gathering in the pools, growth of goodness knows what, beautiful descriptions of the how ugly it looks now, and the branches are falling into the ponds, and they're not looking after the animals. So he says, if only the heirs of Patrick would come back and it'll all be fine. So it's a previous owner, and he was working there, and it was all very well tended. So this is Cua Corrigiei.
Imagine it's a fine summer evening in Edinburgh, towards the end of July 1774, and a group of young men turn into one of those dark, narrow closes off the High Street. They're on their way to pick up their friend from the tenement where he lives with his mother. They help him into a sedan chair to carry him, because he's still recovering from a nasty head injury he received the week before, after falling down a flight of stone steps in a night out in the town with the lads. However, he hasn't actually been very well for the past few months, suffering from severe depression with violent outbursts, and his poor mother has been at the end of her tether. So off they go through the narrow winds and back streets. They pass by the taverns and houses where they've been known to spend the night carousing, and instead he finds himself delivered into a straw bed in a cell at the Bedlam, Edinburgh's asylum. And his friends would never forget his shrieks and screams of anger, horror and betrayal when he realised where they had brought him. 8 weeks later, he was dead, and he was just 24 years old. He was the most promising young poet in Scotland, having just had a volume of poems published the year before, and his name was Robert Ferguson. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, a young boy of 15 is loitering home after a day's work in his father's fields, a young girl by his side, a bonny, sweet, sonsy lass. He turned his feelings into verse. "'Tis this in Nelly pleases me, 'tis this enchants my soul, for absolutely in my breast she reigns without control." His first love, his first song, his name, Robert Burns. And it was later, after discovering Ferguson's work, that Burns truly found his own muse and acknowledged his great debt to him. However, our attention today is focused on a third poet, completely unknown to the other two, because he belonged to a different cultural tradition and was composing in Gaelic. A 50-year-old Highlander who had been in the Edinburgh Town Guard for the past 6 years, and who was possibly patrolling the streets as poor Ferguson was carried to the Bedlam. This is, of course, our friend Duncan Ban MacIntyre. As Peter said, Duncan owed his position in the Guard to the influence of the Earl of Breadalbane and his old captain, his old militia captain, Duncan Campbell. The Town Guard, it wasn't actually a military force to guard the city from attack or invasion. It was really a police force to keep order on the streets. They numbered around about 120, divided into 3 companies in command of a captain. What a contrast from the fresh air and open space of the Highlands to the cramped, stinking streets and alleys of 18th century Edinburgh. But in fact, the Town Guard was mainly made up of retired Highland veterans. And we also have some images of the Guard in action. And here's the first image. What a dashing band of warriors in their dazzling scarlet firing off their muskets. Of course, these are modern reenactors. The reality was a bit different, and here they are as they really were in image 2. Lined up with their captain in charge, a sergeant and a drummer boy. Uniforms more muddy red than dazzling, and looking much more like an 18th century Dad's Army. Now, Heart of Midlothian to most people is a football team. And could we have the next image? But those who have done a tour of Edinburgh or know it a bit better will recognise this heart on the cobblestones outside St Giles Cathedral as marking the spot of the original heart. And here is the original Heart of Midlothian as it once stood in the middle of the High Street in our next image. The notorious toll booth, Edinburgh's prison for important offenders, and forever associated with the most notorious captain of the Town Guard, John Porteous. Sir Walter Scott, another great poet of the era, but better known as a novelist, gives us a dramatic account of the Porteous affair in his novel appropriately called The Heart of Midlothian. 2 smugglers were lodged in the toll booth awaiting their execution, The smugglers were seen as local heroes at the time, as customs duties were highly unpopular and regarded as an English imposition after the Union, so the two men had many friends prepared to help them to escape. Their first attempt was to saw a bar off their cell window and climb out, but this failed when one of them, Andrew Wilson, who was a big, strong, well-built man, he got wedged in the window and wasn't able to get out. He wasn't able to get back in either. Their second attempt was made when the two condemned men, as was the custom, were escorted to church for the Sunday service. The authorities, although they were putting the men to death, they did have a care for their eternal souls. But Wilson's mind wasn't on the worship. At the end of the service, he grabbed two guards, one with each hand and a third with his teeth, and that allowed his young friend and accomplice to do a runner. Wilson now was even more of a hero, but he faced the gallows alone, and on the fateful day he was marched down to the grass market by Captain Porteous and about 80 guardsmen, where he was duly hanged in front of a large crowd. At this point, however, some of the crowd were moved to show their displeasure by pelting the guard with stones, while one valiant soul tried to cut down Wilson's body. Captain Porteous reacted by ordering his men to fire, killing and wounding several citizens. Some of his command, reluctant to obey these orders, instead fired over the heads of the crowd, which, well, because of Edinburgh's high buildings, that unluckily had the unintended effect of killing and wounding people watching out of their windows. Poor Captain Porteous had gone too far and found himself lodged in the toll booth, awaiting his own execution. When a reprieve was sent from London, there was a strong sense of justice not being done, mingled with more anger at English meddling in Scottish affairs. So in a well-organised plot, late one night, the guard was surprised and disarmed. Captain Porteous removed from the toll booth in his nightgown and carried down to the grass market to meet his grisly fate, strung up on a makeshift gallows on a dyer's pole. Not the finest moment in the history of the town guard. But while this drama was unfolding, Duncan Ban was just a young boy of 12, far away in beautiful Glenorchy, and Sir Walter Scott had still to be born. By the time Scott was being brought up and attending school and university in Edinburgh, Duncan Ban was well established in the town guard. And Scott paints a colourful picture of this fine institution. Their base was the guardhouse, which sat in the middle of the high street down from the toll booth, and Scott gives us a description of it, and we have an image of it here. A long, low, ugly building, which to a fanciful imagination might have suggested a long black snail crawling up the high street and deforming its beautiful esplanade. So you can see what Scott meant. Now, although the guard might look to us like a dad's army, in fact, they were mocked and feared in equal measure. Scott tells us that they weren't trained to endure with much patience the insults of the mob, and speaks of the alternate derision and terror that his fellow high school students had for the guard. Although muskets were part of their armoury, the weapon most talked about and most feared was the infamous Lochaber axe. And here we have our next image.